With what will probably be my favorite precon from the Bloomburrow precons, let's start off with Squirreled Away, which is all about these squirrels as evidenced by his name. I've done a Chatterfang deck in the past, but I want to see what Hazel and her crew here bring to us instead and see what we can do with this. So let's take a look at the deck now. So first off, let's take a look at the commanders that they offer us here, starting with Hazel of the Root Bloom. For 2, a black and a green. It's a squirrel druid that has tap and pay 2 life and tap X untapped tokens you control. Add X mana in any combination of colors. At the beginning of your end step, create a token that's a copy of a target token you control. If it was a squirrel, create 2 instead, and it's a 3/5. So Hazel, just like Chatterfang, likes tokens, but in her case, she uses them to make huge amounts of mana and clones tokens that you have, giving you double if that token happens to be a squirrel. We can leverage that with some of the cards that are already in the deck, as well as some of our forthcoming upgrades, but let's take a look at the other new commander, which is the Odd Acorn Gang. For 3, a black and a green. It's a squirrel warrior with menace, trample, and reach. Squirrels you control have tap. Target squirrel gets +2/+2, gains trample until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery, and it says whenever one or more squirrels you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. It's a 5/5 to start. Odd is definitely the word I would use here. Believe it or not, this is actually more of a Voltron style commander than anything else. And for those that don't know what that term means, Voltron is a term in commander that means you power up your commander exclusively and try to knock an opponent out with damage off the commander, because at 21 damage from a commander, they lose the game. So as soon as that happens, they're out. With the Odd Acorn Gang, all these squirrel tokens that we're going to be making can then tap and give the gang +2/+2 each. And with its built-in trample, it can become a very dangerous, impossible one-shot kill to somebody's life total. And that ability to just draw a card off of combat damage is just kind of gravy in the deck. So with that out of the way, what are we going to be adding to this deck to not only make it stronger, but more thematic? Well, let's start off by getting rid of what I consider a terrible card in Commander, and that is Chittering Witch. It was really designed to be a Throne of Eldraine limited card, and the only reason I can see why they added here is it makes tokens to use with Hazel, but we can just do so much better. But to do so, we're going to use a card from the Bloomburrow main set with Camellia, the Seed Miser. For 1, a black and a green, it's a squirrel warlock with menace. It gives all of our other squirrels menace, and whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, you create a 1/1 squirrel creature token, and you can pay 2 to forage, and then you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel you control. Foraging means either exiling 3 cards from our graveyard or sacrificing food, and she's a 3/3 to start. So not only does she net us tokens for sacrificing foods, she can also make all of our squirrels better with her forage ability. This is so much better than the Chittering Witch, and I love the theme that they've installed with the squirrels digging around for food and getting benefits for doing so. The second cut I'm going to make is going to be Arasta of the Endless Web. In my own experience, Arasta has been a major disappointment whenever I've played her. Your opponents will not often care if you make a token off of it. They'll just simply blow it up and let you have the token in order to get rid of it right away. And sometimes they just aren't playing instants and sorcery, so you're relying on your opponent to play something to make it worthwhile, and I don't like depending on them to make the card actually function at its best. So instead, I'm going to swap it out for an old and reliable enchantment that helps power up Hazel's abilities and even Chatterfang in the deck. It's time for some doubling season for a green enchantment. If you create 1 or more tokens, doubles that. If you put 1 or more counters on a permanent, you do double that instead. I recommend this one a lot, but it's for a good reason. It is the best token doubling card ever printed, since it also doubles +1/+1 counters. I could have chosen one of the other token doublers, but doubling season actually plays into the abilities of Camilla and Gormon's talent, making it just an all-around great choice to include in this deck. Next up is going to be Nadier's Nightblade. Now, the Nightblade is a fine card, but it's very narrow that it only does something if a token dies, and that means anything else dying, it doesn't really affect the game. Instead, we're going to use a new toy from the Modern Horizons 3 set, Marionette Apprentice. For 1 and a black, Human Artificer, it fabricates for 1, and then whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. So the trade-off here is you lose the life gain aspect that comes with the creatures dying, but we also gain artifacts going to the graveyard to drain our opponents out, which works nicely with all the food mechanics of the squirrels from this plane. Now, the next card I would like to say, for the record, I really like. It's going to be Nested Shambler, but in this deck, it is a terrible card. You have very little in the way of equipment to use to bulk it up in order to get a big burst of squirrels off of it dying, and very few ways of getting counters on it either, making a very mediocre card in this deck. So instead, I want to use a way to not only get consistent token bursts off of it, but a big mana sink for Hazel's mana ability using For the Common Good from the main set. X green, it's a sorcery. Create X tokens that are copies of a target token you control, and then tokens you control gain indestructible until your next turn. You gain 1 life for each token you control. So not only could you copy a token creature a bunch of times, you could even do things like treasures, food, blood, any of that stuff. You get to see a bunch of cool stuff with this spell. I want to see a turn where I can copy a food or a treasure with the Academy manufacturer out and just go ham making tons of tokens off of that. But speaking of token creators, we're actually going to cut one from the main deck, and that is Squirrel's Nest. It's just way too slow. The only time I'd ever want to run this card is if you were running Earthcraft, which is currently a $112 reserves list card, which is super narrow and not worth the money. So instead, let's take a look at a different token generator with Nut Collector. For 5 and a green, it's a human druid that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you can create a 1/1 squirrel creature token, and if you have Threshold, which is 7 cards in your graveyard, all squirrels get +2/+2. So while this costs twice as much to cast as the Squirrel Nest, this should be pretty easy to cast thanks to Hazel's mana creation, and you have the added benefit of it being a Squirrel Anthem once you hit Threshold, so it's a 2-for-1 type card with the generation of the Squirrel tokens as well as the Squirrel boost. Then I'm going to cut another token creation off of here, but it's also a mana fixing here, and that is Wolf Willow Haven. Now, it's a good card for acceleration, but I think the only reason it was in the Precon to begin with is because you can be sacked to make wolf tokens to work with Hazel's abilities, and I'd rather give this to get a new card into the deck from the main set with Thorn Vault Forager. For 1 and a green is a Squirrel Ranger that can either tap to add a green, tap and forage to add 2 mana of any combination of colors, or 3 and a green tap to search your library for a squirrel card, reveal it, and then put it into your hand and then shuffle, and it's a 2/2. So with the Forager, we get to keep a mana accelerator in the deck, but it also has a forage activation to get bigger as a burst of mana and a squirrel tutor activation. So I love this card for the deck. So, you can go grab one of your more powerful squirrels like Camellia or Chatterfang to make the deck pop off that much easier. Now, moving on to our next cut, and this one might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to remove Enray's Forerunners. And instead, I want a finisher that is more thematic for the deck, and that's going to be Draykeeper. For 3, a black and a green, it's an elf druid that when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 1/1 squirrel creature tokens, and you can pay 3 and a black. Squirrels you control get +1/+0 and gain menace until end of turn, and it's a 2/2 itself. So this does a couple things for us. First, it gives us a squirrel-centric finisher instead of a generic one like the Forerunners, and it gives us a mana sink for the late game. 2 activations off this gives us the same 2 power boost that the Forerunners would give us, but it can be made to go higher if we can pay a bit more into it. And then something to remember about Hazel, her mana creation ability does not need creature tokens to activate. It needs any tokens. So food, treasures, blood, clues, all these things essentially laying around not doing much for us at the time can become static mana rocks essentially with Hazel's activated ability. So if you have a bunch of those laying around, you can use them to make a huge mana dump into the Draykeeper and make all of our squirrels into a lethal threat that's just as good, if not better, than a one-shot off of the Forerunners. Then my next cut on the chopping block may surprise some of you with how I talked about it in the Wick video, but I'm going to cut Ogre Slumlord from the deck. My reasoning for this is very simple though. The deck focuses more on tokens, which don't trigger with the Slumlord to make rats, and his static buff only affects rats, so it doesn't really affect our main game plan with the deck, which is dealing with the squirrels. So Slumlord is not the play that's going to be going on here. Instead, we're going to take a card that I run in my current Chatterfang deck that is much more effective and works great here with Tendershoot Dryad. For 4 and a green, it's a Dryad with Ascend, and at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 Sapperling creature token, and then saps get +2/+2 as long as you have the City's Blessing, and it's a 2/2. So getting the City's Blessing is very trivial in a squirrel deck, which means that the Dryad should be spitting out Sapperlings every turn for us, and then those can add to Hazel's mana ability, net extra squirrels off of Chatterfang, or just be a much more consistent way of getting us tokens than the Slumlord would be in this deck. And then moving on to the next cut, we're going to take out a card that has been power crept out of the game for the most part and is not nearly good enough to run here, and that is Plague Crafter. Without one of the clauses of them forcing them to sacrifice either a non-token or the highest mana value or power creature that they have, this card is just mostly mediocre in the deck. It's just a card that I would really only consider if I could reanimate it consistently or get it back to my hand to recast repeatedly, but that's not what this deck is all about. So let's get another new card in the deck, which is one I used in the Wick deck video with Valley Rotcaller. For 1 in a black, Squirrel Warlock with Menace. Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life equal to the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats you control, and it's a 1/3. So sometimes the board's gonna get gummed up and you just need that extra little push to finish somebody off, and this can give us that reach we need to burn our opponents out. They got too low to survive before stabilizing their board with blockers. And then our last change to the deck is going to actually be to remove a land, in this case Evolving Wilds, and adding one of my favorite token synergies with Mirkwood Bat. Every token that we create, be it a creature or an artifact, is going to drain all of our opponents with this on the board. So this makes any kind of token doublers, any kind of ways of copying tokens like with Hazel's ability, just that much more dangerous to have around with the bats, because you're going to slowly just get eaten away by them. And it gives us that little extra bit of reach, just like the Rot Collar gives us to burn them down. Now, before I end the video, I wanted to talk about a particular card that is a card that would be great as an upgrade for this deck, but it has already jumped up in price prior to the reveal of the Precon. So if you own one, great, go for it. But otherwise, I caution against buying Deranged Hermit for 3 green. It's an elf with Echo of 3 green. And it says when it enters the battlefield, create 4 squirrel creature tokens, and it gives squirrels +1/+1, and it's a 1/1. It's a squirrel lord, it's a squirrel token machine, and it would be a great thing to hit with Saw in Half, which comes in the Precon. But it's also on the reserve listing, going for about $68 as of time of recording if it's in a good condition. You can get some heavy play copies if you just want to play the card on off of TCG Player right now, but the card is not strictly necessary to play the deck, so I feel you'd be better putting that money towards either other upgrades in the deck or just upgrading other decks that you want to mess around with. So that's what I have for you guys today. That's the Squirrel Away Precon upgrades. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is there anything that I left out? Anything that you think I should not have included? Let us know down there. And while you're down there, please like, share, subscribe. All those things help my channel grow, as I'm now over 1,000 subs. We're going to have a little giveaway here coming up soon. But until next time, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.